Hello, welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 152 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 8 of A Storm of Swords, that's Daenerys 1.
And as always, we're going to chat about the chapter, we're going to try not to spoil any future plot points for you, and hopefully we're going to provide you some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some relevant news and listener correspondence. Be sure to check out the show notes, they'll provide some additional information that will be very handy if you're not reading along. How are you, Mackelly Ray?
I'm doing all right. I want to thank you for joining me this morning so early.
Yes, no, it's good. I'm always good for an early start.
You're much better at that than I am. I've been up for a half hour, so hopefully I've gotten my my early morning voice over and done with.
I'm currently at the 2-hour mark of having been up. So
wow, do you get up early? We're recording
not by choice.
Oh, we're recording so early because Stacy's basically her entire family is down, so I'm sharing the house with 9 other people. So we're recording before most people get up and start making a racket. How are you?
I'm fine. Nothing to complain about. We were talking at our live video session with the Royal King's Guard members
and Lords Paramount.
And Lords Paramount too. We were talking about the funny stories that we could tell about our seniors if we were less discreet. But I did think of one afterwards that I don't think I've told on here, but just edit this out if I have.
Okay.
When I lived in London, my mother-in-law came to visit, and she was comically inept. I mean, she was like, if you could have made a movie with the title A Rube in the Big City, it could not have been more apt the way she behaved when she was in London. Okay. So we were on a London Underground, the tube. And you've probably been on underground type trains before. The seats are along the sides, so
right.
You sit facing inwards to the carriage. And she was sitting with her son, Jake. I'm worried now by your face that I've told this on this.
I don't know that I've ever heard this story, let alone on the show.
She was sitting next to her son, Jake, and she was looking across the carriageway, across the carriage, as you have to do.
Yeah.
And above the people, there was a London Underground map, and she was sort of plotting the route we were taking. She was looking at this very intently. You could see sort of really paying attention to it. And while she was paying attention to it, me and Carson were on the other side of the tube standing up because it was very busy, very crowded. And I was just watching her looking back over my head at this map. And her son, Jake, got up and walked away. Okay? And I noticed that she did not notice that happen.
Oh, no.
And a random lady came and sat down next to my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law then said, reaching with her right hand to put her hand on the knee of her son. She said, so we need to get off in 2 stops time. And this lady was squirming in her seat like, oh my God. And I just knew it was going to happen. And I could just feel it in my bones. And of course, what would a kind-hearted soul do at that point? They would say, Valerie, and, alert her to the mistake she was making. But I just nudged Carson and said, Carson, look.
Your mom's grabbing some lady's leg.
And Carson saw the sort of snapshot of it, was absolutely mortified, as you would be yourself, and sort of yelled, Mom! Across the carriage. And Valerie looked up and could see the 3 of us standing there.
She still had her hand on
mental head count realized.
Oh no. It's an honest mistake. It could have happened to anyone.
It could have happened to anyone. And I feel so bad that I let it run when I could have stopped it, but I just knew it was funny.
You knew comedic gold was impending.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I thought I'd share that one.
Yes, we had a good chat. We had a really good chat. It was so much fun. It's always so much fun.
It is fun. It is fun. If we could just give up everything else, we would do that all the time.
Oh yeah. That's way more fun than doing this. Just chatting with everybody.
It is.
Well, we got a lot to talk about, so guess we should move on.
Let's get down to business then. How did we leave Dany? Last we saw of Daenerys Targaryen, she was trying to unpick the visions she'd seen in the House of the Undying, refusing again to marry Xaro Zoan Daxus, avoiding an assassination attempt, this time coordinated by the angry warlock Pyat Pri, on the docks of Qarth, thanks to the intervention of two strangers, Strong Belwas and Arstan Whitebeard, the latter of whom is familiar to Ser Jorah and vice versa, but Mormont cannot place him. The two were sent by Illyrio Mopatis to bring Dany to the Seven Kingdoms. She has them rename their three ships Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar. Mackelly, why don't we give the summary of this one?
I think we can do that. Well, Daenerys is on board Balerion, the ship, not the dragon reborn, unfortunately for her. Watching her dragons chase each other in the cloudless sky, she's never been so happy. Her khalasar? Less so. They fear the poison water, and alternately pray and throw up at the motion of the ship. Dany's stormborn. No weather can worry her. She's sailed many times trying to stay ahead of the usurper and loves sailing. Her brother Viserys bullied her for it, but he was a fool. If he wasn't, he'd be where she is instead.
She misses him, not the man he became, but the sweet older brother of her childhood. She's joined on the deck by the captain, who after initial trepidation has begun to enjoy the dragons. The rat population is being kept in check. The whole crew, in fact, love to watch them fly. The dragons play by attacking each other from above, using the sun to hide their approach. Rhaegar and Viserion crash into the sea together, but never hurt each other. Drogon flies further, always hunting, always hungry.
Progress is slow. The wind has deserted them, and only two of the three ships can really make use of oars. They're towing Balerion, the ship again, but at a glacial pace. Ser Jorah and Dany discuss how large the dragons might grow and how long they'll live. Ser Jorah only has clues from legend as to their size, but no clue about the lifespan. The Targaryen dragons all died in battle. It's not easy to kill a dragon, but it's not impossible. Arstan Whitebeard has a bit more info. Balerion, the dragon this time, was about 200 years old when he died.
Furthermore, he tells that Balerion could swallow an aurochs whole, and dragons, with food and freedom, never stop growing. He explained that those who were confined to the dragon pit in King's Landing never achieved the size of their forebears. Ser Jorah doesn't like being out-knowledged and wonders how the aging squire got his intel. He says he served in King's Landing during Aerys' reign and saw the skulls on the walls. Dany's intrigued. Did Arstan meet her father? He did, but he cannot bring himself to describe him very fondly. Her brother Rhaegar, by contrast, is remembered with admiration.
But Arstan won't lie. He questions Viserys' claim that Rhaegar was the finest swordsman. Indeed, Arstan recalls the bookish child that he was, and that he only learned to fight when he read something in a scroll that inspired him to do so. Whitebeard leaves to attend Belwas. Ser Jorah warns Dany not to trust him, too old to be a squire and too well-spoken. The wind finally picks up after taking a week off, and later that evening Ser Jorah visits Dany in her room. He's reminded of the riddle of her 3 betrayals and is concerned over the motivations of Arstan, Belwas, and Illyrio Mopatis. If Mirri Mazdror was the betrayal for blood, then who is more likely to be the one for gold than the avaricious businessman Illyrio Mopatis?
Jorah has a plan. Redirect the ships to Slavers Bay. There, sell the goods that are on board to pay for an army of Unsullied. Dany's not quite impressed. Every Unsullied she's seen is an unimpressive overweight bodyguard, but Mormont tells the tale of how an army of 3,000 Unsullied stood firm against the mighty khalasar of Dothraki. Only 600 of the 3,000 survived, but on the 4th day the khalasar threw their braids down at their feet and left.
The idea has many dangers, but her khalasar would certainly be happier to go over land. And Jorah would be happier to have 1,000 Unsullied at his back when Dany returns to Pentos. Dany's convinced. She leaps, naked, from her bed to enact the plan. But this is all too much for Ser Jorah, and he grabs her and kisses her. She protests, but Mormont reminds her that the dragon has 3 heads, and she no longer has any living blood relatives. But she can marry, and nobody will be truer to her than he is.
It's a bold move by Ser Jorah. He's sort of in the friend zone, and he's trying to get out of it. But her reaction was not entirely unambiguous. I mean, she said you shouldn't, but she definitely kissed him back for a while. So
right. Yeah.
That's hardly going to quell his ardor. Yes,
I think you're right. Is it the Guardian that refers to him as Sir Friendzone?
Yeah. Yeah. It is unfortunate because he is madly in love with her, but we'll have to see. Maybe she'll agree to this. I mean, I think she believes that she can no longer have children.
Right.
So now, sort of like her marriage no longer becomes one of, making
a family who she wants to have a family with.
Right. It's still potentially something she could do to forge an alliance when she gets back to Westeros. But
good point.
But if news got out that she was barren, that might taint that as well. You know, like who wants to marry into a dead end? You know.
Yes. Good point. Well, it's been a while since we last saw Dany. She really did not have much time in the limelight in A Clash of Kings.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tricky to write this book because, of course, you've got these very, very distant characters who just don't intersect.
Right.
And so you've got to keep Dany interesting. I mean, Dany's very important to the overall narrative, but you've got to just give her sort of like episodic excitement just to sort of bring her in and say, hey, this is happening over in Essos.
Don't forget about Dany. She's doing stuff too.
Exactly, yeah. And Karth was tricky because there was lots of intrigue, but just very little momentum.
Yeah.
She got there, people were excited by her, people wanted her dragons, she refused, she left, and nobody likes her anymore.
Right. She asked for help, everyone said no.
Yeah.
So
Well, everyone said no with sort of caveat, unless you wanted to give me a dragon.
Right. I'm saying no, but I could be persuaded to say yes. Yeah, only Davos, who had 3 POV chapters in A Clash of Kings, had less than Dany. She had 5. And it's been a while. The last time we had a Dany chapter was April 12th. It aired, so we recorded that ahead of time. So we're now into early August, so it's been quite a while.
Yeah, and I think the thing about everybody in Westeros is that you get a little bit of them in other people's chapters.
Yeah.
So the Dothraki are not faring too well on the ship. They'd already expressed that they fear water that horses can't drink, so oceanic body of water is not a good fit for them.
No. I wondered if Dany was maybe like, it's going to be fine, you'll see, just trust me, get on the ship, it's no big deal. And here they are, alternating puking and praying.
But most people, I mean, I'm right in thinking this, most people, if they're on the sea for a period of time, they get over their seasickness, right? Most people.
I think so.
Yeah.
The longest I've been on the water is 4 cruises, and those things are so big, it takes a seriously stormy sea to really see the effects. But, I've noticed when we went snorkeling in Hawaii, we spent basically the whole day on a ship, except for when we were in the water. And when we got back to land, all the rest of the evening, every now and then I would feel like I was being tossed by a wave, even though obviously I wasn't.
The same happens to me with wakeboarding. Every time I get back from wakeboarding, and that's not as long a period of time, but I have that same sort of like, I'm not quite stable on my feet for the rest of the day.
I think that might be called land legs.
There you are.
I'm not positive.
It's because you're salt, I tell you. You're salt.
Yeah, they're definitely showing their loyalty to Dany here we're talking generationally built-in fear of the poison water, as they call it, and they're overcoming it for her.
Remind forgetful listeners, if you would, Mackelly, why do these people owe Dany their loyalty? What has she done for these people? I was thinking about that earlier, and I was like, you know what? I can't really think of very much. She's not been a great Khaleesi to them, really.
Well, I think... So after Drogo died, his co's all basically chose the choice people in Drogo's Khalasar and made smaller Khalasars out of them and went their separate ways. And the leftovers, who they didn't care for, is what makes up Dany's Khalasar.
So that's where the loyalty comes from. She didn't turf them out to,
more or less
on their own. Okay.
And I think they're all impressed by the dragons. You remember her blood riders were like, she kept offering them gifts and saying, you're my blood rider. And they're like, well, I'll take the gift, but I'm still taking you to Vaes Dothrak.
Right.
So,
right.
Until the dragons hatched. And then they were like, oh, I will pledge my allegiance as your blood rider.
Yeah. No, you're right. They are demonstrating that loyalty at this point.
Dany, however, she's loving the sea, as we mentioned in the summary, but she was born during, she describes this in the chapter, she was born during a terrible storm, which she says the worst storm in Westerosi history. I don't know where she gets that fact from. I'm not sure, but that's her fact, not mine.
Westerosi Almanac of Storms, presumably.
So this little squall is nothing to her. Now, when she mentioned the storm that she was born in to get her name, Daenerys Stormborn Targaryen, I thought I would just remind people what the deal was with that storm. So I can't remember if she mentions this in this chapter, that the Targaryen fleet at Dragonstone was destroyed in the storm. Does she mention that?
She does mention that because
okay.
I remember it, and so therefore I must have read it in the last 3 hours.
Well, since Stannis was preparing to sail to Dragonstone, the garrison at Dragonstone had decided they were going to sell Viserys and Daenerys to him when he got there, because their fleet was destroyed. They had no defense to put up against Stannis. So they were going to basically spare their own lives by selling the Targaryen kids to Stannis when he got there. Because remember, Rhaella died giving birth to Dany. Yeah. So she wasn't a factor. Yeah. So they were going to sell the children to Stannis when he got there. But before he could act, Sir Willem Darry and a few others smuggled them from Dragonstone to Braavos.
Oh, interesting.
So,
William Darry gets a mention later on in this chapter as well.
He does, yes.
Yeah. So the dragons are growing. They're developing their own personalities. So Drogon is the black one. He's the alpha. He's bigger and bolder. He's the first to do things. She said he was the first to fly over the water, first to fly from ship to ship, first to kill a flying fish. A fish jumped out of the water and was barbecued and eaten before it landed. So.
Bad timing for that fish.
Yeah. Rhaegar is green and bronze, and Viserion is cream and gold. And those two in particular like to play fight with each other.
We'll be right back.
Hello, friends. Are you ready to make some unforgettable memories? Well, if so, consider the Marriott Bonvoy program. Discover the perfect destination for your summer getaway and unlock exclusive deals on luxurious accommodations. With our affiliate partnership, you'll enjoy unbeatable savings and a seamless booking experience. Don't let summer slip away. Visit Marriott Bonvoy today and make this vacation season one for the books. Use our Ghosts of Harrenhal affiliate page to check it all out and buy Bonvoy points or give some as a gift. The link to our page is in the show notes. And we get our first trained dragon command, Dracarys, which I was thinking it would have been better to mention that Dracarys app this week than last week. But I feel like the next step, though, so what happens is Jorah comes in and Dany says, hey, watch this cool trick. I watch what I've taught them. And she says, she's holding up a piece of pork or something like that and says, Drogon, Dracarys, and Drogon spits fire at the pork and then eats it. And Jorah goes, Dracarys? And they all turn and look at him, and Viserion, I think it is, spits fire at him, and she's like, oh, be careful with that word. And I was thinking, the next step is to train them to only obey her saying that.
Yes.
Someone else might accidentally say what he did. Dracarys, what does that mean? And it means dragon fire in High Valyrian. That's why she chose it.
Yes. The one thing I would say is, of course, is if it's a command, you'd like to think that she and the dragons are in sort of like agreement about what should receive the Dracarys. When she's holding up a piece of pork, that's what should get it. If Rando says Dracarys near them, they should at least look around and say, Dracarys what? What is it you want me to Dracar?
I need a Dracarys target.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're okay, but I do take your point. It's important to have the right safe word, you know.
Yes, it is. Like you mentioned in the summary, she thinks back about Viserys, and she recognizes that as an adult, he was a weak fool, and that had he been smarter and more patient, he would be the one sailing to reclaim the Iron Throne rather than her. But the fact that she did not care for the man he was doesn't mean that she doesn't miss the little boy that he had been growing up. And she thinks back about how he told her stories and let her crawl into bed with him when she was scared. And you just get... So by the time our story started, Viserys was a grown man, and he was that very hard-to-like person that we got glimpses of in this story
that we grew to not like.
Yes, exactly. But you get to see why here, a bit of why she stuck with him despite the horrible treatment, the bullying and the beatings. She was bonded to him. He was her person, for better or for worse, and we never got to see that little boy that she loved.
Yeah. Two orphans thrown out into the world are going to cling to each other, and
right.
also the older one is going to become hard and unpleasant on some levels.
Yes.
But the younger one is going to cling to them as their only family. It's inevitably going to happen.
And we saw as her family expanded when she married Khal Drogo and became the Khaleesi to this Khalasar, that she obviously depended on him less and less, to the point where when he died, her thought was, he was no dragon. Fire can't kill a dragon. Yeah. So
she corrects Arstan when Arstan refers to him as Prince Viserys and tells him that he was King Viserys, third of his name. I mean, not to be pedantic, but I think to actually be the king, you have to be crowned the king. You know, I mean, he was on some levels in line to the throne, but if you're not crowned, then you're not going to go down in the history books as having been the king. So
right. Although I will add that he technically was crowned by Rhaella on Dragonstone. The family, the Targaryen family in King's Landing, died during the sack of King's Landing before Rhaella died on Dragonstone, giving birth to Dany.
Yes.
In the interim, she had him crowned on Dragonstone, and Daenerys was given the title Princess of Dragonstone and as Viserys' heir. But it has to be recognized. In order, like the riddle, in order to have power, you have to be recognized as having that power. And he
indeed
does not.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know who Arstan is, but it's a riddle that is not yet solved, so we have to sort of tread lightly around this.
Right.
But he has some interesting information here, and certainly information that leads you to surmise perhaps who he is, because he has a lot of intel about King's Landing, about
worst
her father.
Spy ever.
Right. But it's also a little bit awkward because Dany doesn't know her father. She never met him. What she's heard, she'll have heard two different things. She'll have heard what she thinks are the lies of the usurper from certain people.
Yep.
And then she'll have had people who are loyal to her who've told her that he was a great king, and so she has no idea what her father was like, really. She does now. She was paying any attention to what Arstan said.
Or probably his facial expressions.
Right.
I think the description says, that his face said it all. Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, you can understand why, first of all, she would want to think of her father in a positive light. And she certainly got positive stories from Viserys, because Viserys himself was a little boy the last he saw his father. Yeah. He probably also wanted to think of his father in a positive light. And yeah, certainly you could discount any stories as being lies spread by the usurper. So
yeah. The lies spread by the usurper are a lot closer to the truth.
Right.
Just FYI. But yeah, I mean, Arstan manages to say a few positive things, like, he was nice to people he liked,
Right. Yes. It's kind of reminded me of Sansa trying to say nice things about Joffrey to the Tyrells. He's very comely.
Yes.
That's the best you can do.
He's a snappy dresser. So, but Arstan is actually a lot more interesting, I think, about Rhaegar, because about King Aerys, he is careful. He doesn't say the truth, but it's clear what he means, that he was kind of a monster. But about Rhaegar, he's interesting because we definitely have a vision of Rhaegar, which has been sort of like made by Viserys and Mormont.
Right.
Sort of, they're the ones w'ho've painted this picture.
On Dany's side, on the Essos side, that's where we're getting that from.
So, yes. What's the contrasting picture we get in Westeros?
Robert Baratheon's take on him, that he was a kidnapper and rapist. And
we'll be right back.
This episode is sponsored by Audible. To get a free audiobook, or 2 if you're an Amazon Prime member, go to our exclusive URL, audibletrial.com/ghostsharrenhal. You can find the link in our show notes.
Yes. Good point. Those are not things you can just brush under the carpet, I suppose. Yes. But the thing about that is, it's always, with Rhaegar, that incident is out of character. There's no doubt about that. Both sides agree on that, I think. That before that, he was well-liked and well-respected, right. And sort of, people were looking forward to him being the king versus his father. But Arstan has definitely a different take, that he was actually very bookish and not very interested in fighting, which is fascinating, until he read something that told him he needed to learn how to fight. And I'm going to assume, Mackelly, because you are you, that you know what he read.
Well, we don't know what he read. I have a thought on what he read, but
I knew you would.
It hasn't actually been revealed. But so just to follow up on your original point, so Arstan focuses on, like you said, his being Rhaegar's intelligence, single-minded tenacity, and his musical talents. His line, Dany says, "What was he like?" And he says, "Able above all, determined, deliberate, dutiful, single-minded." And so it gives us more insight into who this crown prince was. And when, first of all, we've got all these little fragmented pieces, and he kind of seems like a mystery wrapped in an enigma, because he's done things that don't fit into his character, and some people think he's great, and some people think he is terrible. But I spent a lot of time this week thinking about all the pieces and how they might fit together. And so we've got, like I said, you ask some people about him. He's a monster who abducted Lyanna Stark and raped her repeatedly and left his wife and children to go do so. And then we've got Viserys painting him as a heroic warrior, and Jorah calls him the last dragon, and Arstan says that he's incredibly intelligent, cerebral, musically gifted. But he's also the kind of guy who saw his father for what he was and tried to right it with that secret council at the tourney at Harrenhal, which we the information we got from the world of Ice and Fire. That's not actually been mentioned in the story. But, well, to this point in the story, I think it does get some references later on. But anyway, and like you said, he read something that caused him to decide that he had to be a warrior. And in that dream, or the vision rather, that Dany had at the House of the Undying, he told his wife Elia, or at least a woman, we assume his wife Elia, that he, being his newborn son, is the prince that was promised. And his, again being his son, is the song of Ice and Fire. So, maybe he stumbled upon the prophecy of the prince that was promised and thought he had a role to play fathering this prophesied son, and it, for some reason, required that he become a warrior as part of this prophecy. And so the determined, deliberate, single-mindedness could be about this prince who was promised prophecy. Maybe he became obsessed with it, and he did whatever he had to do in order to fulfill that prophecy, even if it were things that you might be considered out of character. Like we've talked about before, the whole Ice and Fire part. Possibly he thought that Lyanna was the ice part and kidnapped and raped her in hopes of creating a third child that had this ice factor in it, because when he looked at Dany in that vision, he said, "There must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads."
Right.
So, I don't know. That's
a tremendous take. I mean, that's all off the cuff, right? I just threw that question out, and you were just ready with an answer.
Well, it happened that I spent a lot of time this week thinking about that.
But I will say, I absolutely hear everything you're saying here, but I have another idea. Was King Aerys at the tournament at Harrenhal?
Yes.
He was. I wonder if Rhaegar wasn't that great of a fighter. I know he won the tournament at Harrenhal, right? That's when he gave the roses to Lyanna Stark.
Yep.
But I wonder if maybe people let him win. I wonder if it feels like in today's Westeros that doesn't happen, that people fight, honestly in tournaments, and it doesn't matter if you're Jaime Lannister or Loras Tyrell, everyone gives it their best, yeah. But I wonder if perhaps because of the nature of King Aerys, people let Rhaegar win.
Oh, yes, they're afraid to upset the king,
and that coming late to fighting, he never got that good at it. I mean, he did die in single combat with somebody who was very good at single combat, but any claim that he was the best fighter is clearly not true.
Right. Oh, yeah. Those are all solid points, yeah. Now, of course, kind of going to your point in a different way, Arstan says in this chapter that winning in battle or winning in a tournament can come down to just luck sometimes. You could win one tournament and go out early the next because of something you had for dinner, or the wind could blow in your favor one day and lead to victory.
Or subtext, you're the king's son and people let you win.
Could be that too. One thing Arstan adds is that nobody truly knew Rhaegar, and we certainly don't truly know Rhaegar yet. So
yeah. But it is interesting to have this important background character that you get these conflicting things about. It makes him kind of rich and interesting.
Yes, definitely complex character so far, as far as we've seen.
Yeah, and Arstan too. I mean, he's a puzzle. He knows an awful lot about the Targaryens, and yet apparently was never knighted, and says he's not from a noble house.
He doesn't seem to have a last name that would indicate that he's from a noble house.
Yeah. Jorah is very suspicious of him. He points out that he's far too well spoken for someone in his station. And then I think Jorah also has a sort of like, what he has seen and done is too much for somebody who's a squire to a eunuch.
Yes, right.
He met King Aerys. Come on. But then on the other hand, he also downplays Arstan's stories, like, oh, you heard Rhaegar played the harp? Everybody did. He played it all the time, you know.
You saw him in a tourney, you and 1,000 other people.
Exactly. So it's kind of like he can't decide whether to just disbelieve him or just to play down what he's saying, you know, that anyone could be saying these things. But Arstan clearly was involved in King's Landing in some way during the reign of King Aerys.
Yeah, he seems to know an awful lot for someone who, at his advanced age, is just now a squire, not even to someone very squire-worthy, but to strong Belwas, who, as Danny puts it, couldn't scheme his way to breakfast.
He doesn't have to scheme his way to breakfast, he demands breakfast.
Right.
And breakfast comes running.
Yeah, it's possible he could be another exiled knight, but too ashamed to acknowledge it.
Right.
One thing that Jorah says is, Danny says, he doesn't even carry a sword. And Jorah says, well, I saw him with that staff. He's pretty nimble and handy with it. So, you know, he clearly has some sort of fighting training skill.
The exiled knight thing does make some sense, actually, because it feels like Meraxes wanted to send somebody to get Daenerys, somebody who was strong enough to protect her, and I don't know, someone who would come across as non-threatening. I'm not sure Strong Belwas is the choice I would have made, but, you know, he fits some of those criteria.
Right.
If this was an exiled knight who perhaps is a Targaryen loyalist, I mean, clearly he was close to the seat of power when the Targaryens were in charge. Maybe he volunteered for this. I'd like to go and help Daenerys, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
But we don't know.
So after our Arstan has to go tend to his strong Belwas, as Belwas has shown up on deck, Dany starts counting her enemies, and basically she and Jorah are discussing the fact that there's a lot of people who want to kill her, so she needs to be careful who she trusts. And, you know, they discuss the usurpers hired assassins. Remember, there was the attack on her at the Western Market in Vaes Dothrak by the wine merchant. The warlocks of Karth, led by, you know, the face of that would be Pyat Pree to us. And then she also mentions Drogo's Khos, who are now Khals, because they would take her and take her back to the Dosh Khaleen in Vaes Dothrak, because that's what's supposed to happen to a Khaleesi after her Khal dies. So she's going against their tradition here. And then also she wonders, is Zorazo Daxus an enemy, or is he just someone that she disappointed? And she wonders about Quaithe. Her thing about Quaithe is Quaithe an enemy or just a dangerous friend? Which I kind of like that phrasing, dangerous friend.
Yeah, but also, I mean, at least for those two, are they just in the rearview mirror now? I mean,
right.
They took their chance to befriend her in Karth, and now she's left Karth, and maybe they're out of the stories.
Yeah, that's possible.
The others clearly have assassination on their mind and may continue to follow her, but those two, I don't know. It feels like they had their shot and they missed it. So Jorah's worried about what's going to happen when they get to Pentos. He's worried that she doesn't have any loyalists around her. He counts 4. Yes. Himself and her 3 blood riders. Doesn't trust Belwas and Arstan. They talk about the vision she had, where she's going to have 3 betrayals: 1 for blood, 1 for gold, and 1 for love. Well, the 1 for blood, they both agree, is Mirri Maz Duur, paying back for the butchery of her village. The 1 for gold, he makes a decent point that Illyrio Meraxes, as somebody who, you know, has built a fortune, is somebody who cares for gold, and so he might betray her for gold. It seems like a reasonable concern. And the difference in Jorah's mind is Mirri Maz Duur was always under Dany's power. She did betray her, but she was Dany's slave, essentially.
Right.
Illyrio Mopatis is plenty powerful, and four protectors won't be enough if Illyrio Mopatis wants something from her.
Yes, exactly. She shows up with her three Blood Riders and Jorah. If Illyrio does have malicious intent, really, she's at his mercy. If he decides he's going to take those dragons from her, there's not a lot she can do to stop him.
Which is why he proposes this idea of bringing an army too. Because if you bring an army, then he's got to think carefully whether or not it's worth the risk of this betrayal.
Right.
The question for me here is that if I was Dany, the first thing I would say to Jorah is, Illyrio Mopatis has always treated me well. You know, he housed and fed me when there was nothing to be gained from it. He gifted me the dragon's eggs. You know, he gave me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me, you know. So he's earned her loyalty by what he's done in the past.
Yeah, so it was either Belwas or she tells Jorah it was either Belwas or Arstan that said that Mopatis cried, shed tears or something when Viserys died. And Jorah's response is, was that for Viserys or was that for the plans that he had for Viserys? Because we know that Ilio and Varys have some sort of Targaryen rebirth in Westeros plan brewing. Yeah. So that might have been it might have been tears because that went against what the plans they'd been setting were.
But here's my question to that. Illyrio Mopatis is not from Westeros. He can't really care who sits on the Iron Throne. He must only be involved in this plot because there's something in it for him. Yes.
As far as we know, like, we don't know Illyrio all that well, but yes, you're right. On the surface, as far as we know, there's no real clear reason why he should care too much about who's on the Iron Throne.
Varys lives in Westeros. He wants, if you take his words at face value, he wants peace in the realm and he wants stability and all those things. And so he might plot to put the right person on the Iron Throne. But it feels like it makes no difference to Illyrio Mopatis, who sits the Iron Throne on the other side of the Narrow Sea. So the one thing is, of course, is that the dragons have hatched. And that could turn anybody's head.
Yes. There's 3 in all the world, and they belong to Dany.
Right. And she owes Illyrio Mopatis something.
Yes, because he gave her those eggs.
And he looked after her as a child,
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I understand Mormont's concern, but I also think it's a bit rough on Mopatis.
Yes. I think his ultimate point is that Dany's been too trusting and surrounding herself with people who want to exploit her. But if you look at it from Dany's perspective, it's a very confusing time and hard to determine who you can trust and who you can't trust. And I think her response to him is also valid, that every man I take into service is a risk. How am I to win without taking such risks?
Yeah, on the subject of it being confusing, he says, Arstan protecting you from that assassination attempt is the kind of thing someone would do to get into your graces. She's like, well, of course, but it works.
It worked. Yeah. And so she's like, well, what do you expect? What shall I do? Just have the you and my Blood Riders? And of course we know that Jorah at least had been spying on her for Robert. We were in that small council meeting when it was mentioned. So can she even fully trust him? I think she probably can at this point, but at some point he was also someone that wasn't trustworthy.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the 3 Blood Riders were ready to, betray her until the dragons were hatched. So
right. They were willing to accept her gifts and then march her off to the Dosh Khalid. But I think Jorah's concerns about Arstan being an agent of Robert Baratheon, at least on their surface, has some validity. I mean, like we mentioned, the guy surely seems to have spent a lot of time in King's Landing. And he so much so that he knew the exact order of Rhaegar's squires. He knew about Rhaegar's harp with the silver strings, and that Rhaegar's oldest friend was Sir Arthur Dayne. That seems like things that go beyond what your average person who happened to be working in King's Landing at the time would know. And sure, that's a lot of history about her brother, so maybe at some level he was a Targaryen loyalist. But we don't know what he's been up to since Aerys died. Maybe he has equally strong knowledge of Robert Baratheon and his family. And then, of course, you've got the... Oh, did you...
I was going to agree with that. Yes, I mean, that makes sense that if he served in King's Landing this whole time, he probably would focus more on the stories about her family than about King Robert.
Let me tell you about King Robert. You want to talk about a gregarious guy.
And he got rid of those ugly dragon heads.
and then the obvious point that he seems quite a bit too old to be a squire, and Strong Belwas at least is portraying himself as too dumb to require a squire with what appears to be the intelligence that Arstan has. If they're not agents of the usurper, it certainly seems like something else odd is going on with them.
Yeah.
They're an odd couple.
Sure. The counterpoint is, of course, is that you're saying he clearly was in King's Landing and therefore could well be a Targaryen loyalist. And then there's this gap where we don't know what he did during the 18 years of Robert's rule. Maybe he's been an exile because he was a Targaryen loyalist, and maybe he's been waiting for this opportunity to come back. So there's definitely two diametrically opposed ways he could get to this point.
Right.
One of which is good news for Dany and one isn't. But he did save her life.
Yes, but that could have been part of the plan.
Right. If that thing had got you, I wouldn't have got my lordship. Somebody else would.
Yeah, he could I can't say he could definitely be on the up and up because something seems fishy here.
Yeah, something's not right about him. But is he just denying something? I mean, it doesn't mean he's betraying Dany. That he's not being a straight talker.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So Jorah, who, if you remember, Jorah lives in Essos because he sold slaves to Ned Stark's dismay. Wants Dany to staff her army with slaves, which is
go figure.
On brand, I guess.
Yeah.
And then his plan is to sell the goods that are on board the 3 ships, which are Illyrio Mopatis's, to fund the army to protect them against Illyrio Mopatis. I've got to say, as a friendship move, that leaves a lot to be desired, you know.
Yeah, it's like you ask me if you could store some stuff in my basement, and I'm like, ooh, I can sell that stuff and buy a new TV.
Why would you begrudge me that, Simon? I want a new TV, and I have this stuff of yours. So he tells. Oh, sorry, you've got a point here. The benefit to Jorah.
Well, we'll get more into my thoughts on what Jorah really wants out of his plan here. But I'd just say that jeopardizing the relationship between Dany and Illyrio, I think, does possibly have some benefit to Jorah if he has intentions other than putting Dany in the best position to succeed to getting to the Iron Throne.
Yes, that's a very good point. And of course, that becomes a sort of a real danger of having your closest advisor, bodyguard, would-be lover be someone who's so in love with you, is that they want the best for you, but they want you for themselves.
Right.
And so they're going to get in the way of the alliances that you need to make, you know, so it's all awkward. And that's why Dany has to, I mean, we're talking about it being complex for Dany. It's sort of like complex on multiple levels.
Yes. It becomes quite clear that it is, yes. He tells the story of the 3,000 Unsullied that fended off the 50,000 strong Khalasar, with at least 25,000 of that 50,000 Khalasar being braided being braided Dothraki screamers. And, you know, so basically the story is that Qohor was about to be under attack by this Dothraki Khalasar, and they hired some sellswords, and surprisingly the sellswords bailed out at the last minute. Who could have seen that coming? And,
I think sellswords are always good when you're on the winning side, and they're always a disaster if you're on the losing side.
And as an afterthought, they also sent for 3,000 Unsullied from Astapor. And when the Unsullied got there, the war was basically almost won by the Khalasar. And the next morning, when the Khalasar went to finish off the Cohoric defense, they saw these Unsullied. And despite the fact that they outnumbered them just a huge amount to a very small amount, the Khalasar saw that the Unsullied were on foot and decided anyone who's on foot, we're just going to plow them over, when they could have easily just flanked them. And they didn't, because they didn't respect them because they were on foot. And it turned out to be a big mistake, because the Unsullied withstood all of their attacks, both their arrow attacks and their infantry attacks. And so hearing that story made me question if Drogo could have actually taken his Khalasar to Westeros and won the Iron Throne without the aid of other houses' forces.
Jorah's already made that point, that the Dothraki aren't very good at storming castles, which is sort of how you have to fight in Westeros, because they have castles. So yeah, I mean, I think the reason Daenerys is going to be the greatest Khaleesi of all time is that she's going to bring a little strategic and tactical flexibility to the fighting that
possibly,
natural born Dothrakis don't have, But
right, I mean, they passed on a clear advantage to win the battle. You flank this 3,000 strong army with your 50,000 strong Khalasar, you have a clear path to success. The fact that they passed on that and refused to do it is just bad strategy, which is going to cause them problems.
Yeah. Nevertheless, an impressive story for what the Unsullied are capable of.
Oh, yes. Right.
And the whole thing of the Unsullied being not very impressive in sort of the individual is kind of interesting, because that's not how they're portrayed in the TV show. In the TV show, they're all sort of like muscled and, ready to fight. And here, she's got an impression of the Unsullied as being sort of fat bodyguards.
Yeah, Jorah kind of explains it. He says,
he
don't think about them that way. That's soft work. Eunuchs have a propensity to become fat because food is the only vice that is allowed to them. So, he said, thinking about the Unsullied based on your opinions of those household guard is like thinking of squires based on Arstan.
Right.
Well, I will say, just in case you're curious what Qohor is, Qohor, which is where this Unsullied and Dothraki Khalasar fight took place. Qohor is the easternmost of the free cities of Essos. And it's also mentioned that the Unsullied had a black goat standard flying above them. Uh-huh. The black goat is a god in Qohor. The city was actually founded by worshippers of the black goat who were religious refugees from Valyria. And if you're thinking, that black goat sigil seems familiar, it's because Vargo Hoat, who is Qohoric, flies the black goat sigil with the bloody feet.
It did ring a Dothraki braided bell for me. So thanks for that. So the kiss, I mean, there's not much to say. Jorah is in his 40s. Dany is a teenager. She is beautiful, and he is lonely, and he's in love with her, and she's flouncing around naked. But you got to ask for permission. Can't just force yourself on someone.
Yep. And so it kicks off a series of what's Jorah up to. Okay, so his plan is to derail her from her sea path to stop in Slaver's Bay, to go to Astapor, to buy like 1,000 Unsullied, and then there's no space for 1,000 Unsullied on these ships, so they would have to then march from Slaver's Bay all the way back to Pentos to get to Illyrium Opatis. But both Dany and Jorah mention that the Unsullied don't ride horses. So he's asking her to give up these ships that she's been trying to acquire for quite a long time, to buy a fighting force and then walk across Essos, which is, there's some merit to the plan. I'm not saying that his plan is without merit and he's just trying to sabotage Dany. There's certainly some merit to the plan, but it's a major decision, and he's asking her to give up what she's been working for a long time, trying to get these ships to get to the free cities to try and get her throne back.
I will also mention, just in passing, that there is actually room on these ships. They're not quite big enough for 1,000 Unsullied, but each of the 2 ships that isn't Balerion has 200 oars. So that's, if you kick the oarsmen out of the ships, you've got room for at least 400 Unsullied.
That's a good point. If they buy 1,000, you can take almost half your army on that space alone.
Right, and double up, have 2 guys on each oar. Suddenly, you're up to 800. So, there are alternatives here.
Speaking of the fact that these are big ships, I wondered if possibly did he plan on making this move before he went into the room? Because when he went in, he asked to speak alone with Dany. But nothing he said couldn't have been said in front of Irri and Jiqui. And my first thought was, well, maybe the room was too small for all 4 of them to be in there and talk comfortably. But like you said, Balerion, they describe it as a big old cog.
Yeah.
You'd have to think that the captain's quarters, because that's where she's staying in the captain's quarters, could hold 4 people comfortably enough to discuss.
It might have been hot in there. The dragons had just been belching fire like multiple times.
Little furnaces.
Could you 2 get out, please?
But,
or maybe he was always planning the pass,
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if maybe he thought, I'm going to make my move right now when I go in there. But so she says you should not. She starts to say you should not have done this, and he says, I should have done it, in Karth. I should have done it in Vhagar Teloro. I should have done it in the Red Waste. And in Vhagar Teloro, he told Dany that story about his wife Lyness Hightower. And at the end of the story, he said Lyness looked like Dany, and he called her Daenerys, which he does again here, which she objects to and says, Your Grace. So it seems like when usually he calls her Your Grace or Khaleesi or something like that. It seems like when he's trying to convey that he has feelings for her, he calls her Daenerys. And it was after that story, after he called her Daenerys in Vhagar Teloro, Dany realized he was in love with her and wanted her not as his queen, but as a woman. And she thought at that time she did not feel the same way toward him and thought that he could never have her, but that someday she hoped to give him back Bear Island as like a consolation prize. Like, you can't marry me. I don't love you. You don't appeal to me, but here's Bear Island back.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. He makes the point that, well, the dragon needs 3 heads, according to the sort of prophecies. Aegon had his sister wives. Well, she no longer has any siblings, but she could take spouses. Nothing to stop that. And he's offering himself as one of them. That does imply he doesn't mind if she takes a second husband, unless he's really chancing his arm and suggesting he takes a second wife.
Yeah.
I mean, you're really doubling down here. You're kissing the girl at the same time you're suggesting that this not be just the 2 of you.
It does seem a bit out of character with how much he seems to want to isolate her from other competition for her admiration. I guess this.
The point is, he can't suddenly change the prophecy to say the dragon has 2 heads. Because he's got to work with what he's got here. Yeah.
That's true. He brings up the prophecy to aid him in his desires and plans here. This is more going back to what exactly is his ultimate goal. But after the chapter after the House of the Undying chapter, which I believe was her last chapter in A Clash of Kings, he said to her, "Blue lips speak only lies," and asked, "Why do you care what the warlocks whispered? All they wanted was to suck the life from you."
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, when it fits his purpose, he's like, "Oh, remember that prophecy? Well, here's what it means. Here's what you need to do." So then that begs the question, could her betrayal for love, which is one of the three betrayals, for gold, for love, for blood, could it involve Jorah intentionally steering her wrong because he loves her and wants to keep her to himself?
Yeah. And even, not even maliciously, not even as a betrayal, simply as his attempt to love her could betray her end goals accidentally.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, he points out that basically everyone else except for him and the three Blood Riders are enemies, and that any plan that puts her nearer to those he considers a threat to his position in her life, Illyrio, Arstan, moving toward Westeros, are all bad plans.
Yeah.
And he's wanting to... You could make the argument that his Unsullied plan will significantly delay the amount of time, or increase the amount of time, that it takes her to get from where she is now to her final goal of Pentos.
Yeah, but it might ultimately take the same length of time to get to Westeros. The other thing I think that she said that was clever here is that she said, when he was talking about her trusting too many people, she said, a queen that doesn't trust anyone is as much of a fool as a queen who trusts everyone.
Right.
So she's right. She's got to trust in order to build her Khalasar.
Yeah, and so one final thought about Jorah and how he handles women that he is in love with is, could this possibly be typical behavior when he falls in love for him? His marriage to Lynesse destroyed him, and he blames Lynesse, but maybe he demonstrates this destructive, harmful behavior when he falls in love, this jealousy, controlling, reckless, self-serving kind of behavior. Maybe that's how he behaves.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, maybe
we haven't gotten Lynesse's side of the story.
Right. Yeah, his love language is to overdo everything.
Right.
And stifle what the woman wants to be. Yeah, interesting.
Exactly.
You got some background?
I do have some background. So we get a lot of Dany's thoughts about her dragons while she's standing on deck watching Viserion and Rhaegar fly around. So here's a quick rundown on the anatomy of dragons. They have 4 limbs, 2 wings, which are used as forelegs, think of like a bat or a pterodactyl, and then 2 rear legs. So our A Song of Ice and Fire dragons differ from the frequent depiction of dragons as being 6-limbed with 4 legs and then a separate set of wings. And this was actually done intentionally. George Martin was bothered by the fact that no animal in nature has ever evolved in such a way, that way being the 4 legs and the 2 wings. All that said, you do see some A Song of Ice and Fire artwork showing them with 4 legs and detached pair of wings. But since Dany's dragons are starting to grow up a bit, I thought I'd mention that newborn dragons are known as hatchlings, and dragons that are older but not fully grown are known as drakes. So we don't know exactly how old Dany's dragons are. They're probably somewhere in between, maybe the beginnings of a drake, the ends of a hatchling. I'm not sure. Anyway, Arstan mentions that Balerion was about 200 years old when he died, and that's true, but there's also some speculation involved regarding his true age. The reason is that Balerion was already alive when House Targaryen moved from Valyria to Dragonstone in 114 BC. And we know Balerion died of old age in 94 AC. So his known lifespan is 208 years. However, he could have actually been much older. So
interesting.
we know the dragons can live that long, but Balerion is the only example of a dragon who died of old age. So it's unclear whether his lifespan is the typical lifespan, or if he died young, if he died, as a very old dragon. We don't know because we have a very small sample size of one. And also, Arstan tells us that increasing age means increasing size when it comes to dragons. But we know from history that larger size doesn't always indicate a higher age. For example, the younger Meraxes, who was Rhaenys dragon, one of Aegon the Conqueror's sister wives, was larger than the older Vhagar, who was ridden by Visenya, his other sister wife. Although we don't know when Meraxes was born, we do know that she hatched after the Targaryens arrived on Dragonstone in 114 BC. So, the earliest she could have been born was that year. We also know she died in 10 AC, in Dorne. So that makes it impossible for her to have been older when she died than Vhagar was, who was 181 when she died. So, although Meraxes died younger, we learned from Tyrion 2 in A Game of Thrones that her skull was larger than that of Vhagar's.
Right. So they keep growing, but there's an inherent size as well that they don't. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So comparison with the television show, it's a bit tricky to unpick here because there's spoilers I have to be careful of. The scene on the ship, which was bought with gold that Dany stole from Xaro in the TV show, and not laid on by Mopatis at all. In fact, Mopatis doesn't get a mention at all here in the TV show. Okay. It's just Dany and Jorah watching the Three Dragons. They were always headed to Astapor to buy Unsullied, but they have no obvious means of paying for it other than maybe selling the ship they're on. The assassination attempt doesn't happen until they arrive in Astapor, when she is saved by a strange hooded figure who is oddly familiar, but it would be a book spoiler to reveal who it is, but the Arstan character. There's no kiss from Jorah at this time, so I don't know if that's still to come in the TV show, but certainly not on board the ship.
All right. Good stuff.
Pedantry corner. It's very minor, but in my copy, Karth was misspelled. Had a U in one of its spellings, which was kind of...
Really?
Yeah. Also, she said she'd crossed the Narrow Sea 100 times, but that's not true. She crossed the Narrow Sea precisely once. She sailed on the Narrow Sea 100 times, but she didn't cross it back and forth. She's never been back to Westeros.
Solid point. You gotta be careful with the word cross.
Exactly. Don't cross me.
Well, I probably had this pedantry last time that the Dragon Pit came up, and the fact that it had doors. It has wide doors that like 30 mounted knights could ride through, which is great and all.
I've heard you say these words before.
It just doesn't make sense why there's a roof on the Dragon Pit. There doesn't need to be a roof. They can fly. You could have doors. Of course you need doors. But the dragons don't need to come in and out of the doors. They'll just fly out of it.
Right, but it isn't part of the point of the Dragon Pit to confine them. Wasn't that part of the point?
I think it's more to house them, right? I mean, I don't know. I guess if you want to make sure that they can be confined, then you would put a roof on it. Mm-hmm. It just seems like, why would you have a door on something that the objects inside can just fly out of at will?
Yes.
Because before the Dragon Pit, the dragons weren't confined to any particular location.
Your argument is less with the doors than with the roof, I feel. I mean,
yes,
the Dragon Pit
needs doors, yes.
Because there are humans who can't fly.
Right, and young dragons might not be able to fly high enough to get out of the pit. But my other thought was, so when Jorah is talking about Khal Temos, 50,000 strong Khalasar, he says it was a large Khalasar, not quite as large as Khal Drogo's. But I thought Khal Drogo's Khalasar was 40,000 strong.
Yeah, I thought that too.
So, I don't know. The math doesn't quite add up, but, you know.
Yeah. But,
Anyway.
counting them's awfully hard when they're on the move all the time.
That's true. Getting them to stand still is really difficult.
So news and notes, starting with our weekly Has George Martin Got COVID? He's tested negative for COVID now, and he's faring well, nothing more than a cough and a sore throat, still stuck in his hotel room. His assistant, Sid, is still testing positive, so they're a few days behind in recovery. We wish them both well.
Yes, we do. And the first Game of Thrones fan convention won't be without some star power. Kit Harington, who played, past tense, John, Alfie Allen, Theon, Jack Gleason, Joffrey Baratheon, Christopher Hivju, who plays Thormund, who we just met last week, Kristen Nairn, who plays Hodor, Daniel Portman, Podrick Payne, Gemma Whalen, Yara or Asha Greyjoy, depending on if you're a book person or a TV show person, Isaac Hempstead Wright, who played Bran, all will be attending. That's quite the collection of star power there. The convention will be held at the Los Angeles Convention Center December 9th through the 11th of 2022. Aside from panel discussions, there will also be some trivia, cosplay, meet and greets, autograph signings, and Kristen Nairn is DJing a dance party. So who doesn't want to attend a dance party with Hodor as the DJ?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And the convention hosts will be Jason Concepcion and Greta Johansson.
So speaking of Jason and Greta, they're going to host a new podcast, the official Game of Thrones podcast, House of the Dragon, which launched on August the 3rd. It's definitely a mouthful, but probably some pretty cool stuff about House of the Dragons.
That's how confident we are in the loyalty of our listeners. We can mention other podcasts. We're not afraid.
You can listen to them. You'll be back.
I actually did. I did subscribe to it, but I haven't actually listened to their first episode yet.
All right, let's draw a conclusion on this one. So it's a bit of a change of plan and direction for Dany. Jorah is definitely focused on keeping Dany from getting west too quickly. Arriving with an army in a few weeks is perhaps better than arriving without an army in a few days. You could definitely make that argument, but his motivations are definitely conflicted here.
Yeah, and there's some precedent because multiple times in the past he's wanted her to run further east. Now he wants her to make a pit stop and take the scenic route to Pentos. Yeah. Now, of course, you could make an argument it's to keep her safe, and you can make a solid case for that. But then you got to wonder, is part of his fear the fact that the closer she gets to Westeros, the further west she gets in Essos, is there a higher likelihood that his role in Robert's plan to kill her for a pardon and restoration of his titles, will it become known?
Yeah, which kind of goes to his accusation about Arstan proving his loyalty by preventing an assassination, because that's very much what Jorah did.
True. Yes. Yeah. Good point. Now, we of course know that Varys knew about Jorah's role in spying on Dany for Robert. So you'd have to think with Viserys. So you'd have to think with Varys's and Illyrio's connection that Illyrio might know as well. So maybe Jorah is afraid that Illyrio will tell Dany what he's been up to.
If nothing else, that Illyrio has power over him because of that.
True. Yes.
So, not sure how Illyrio is going to view the theft of all of his goods. Presumably, he won't be too thrilled.
I don't know. What's his line? What are the point of rich friends if not to help you in times like this?
Yeah. And we still don't know who Belwes and Whitebeard really are. You'd think Mopatis would have vetted who he sent. True.
But as Jorah points out, if you buy into the prophecy thing, then two traitors remain. And there's something not quite right about them, so they're people you'd want to consider putting on the watch list.
Yeah. Certainly, if this becomes a democratic Khalasar, we can confidently predict that they will vote for the overland approach, because the Dothraki are not enjoying the sea voyage, not one little bit.
Yeah, instead of Dothraki screamers, we'll have to start calling them Dothraki pukers. They'll definitely be glad to get off of their poison sea.
The dragons are growing, but the small dog size, which is how they was described in this one, is not going to cut it.
No, not yet. Even with their fire breathing, still not going to do a whole lot as in defense of her.
Yeah.
And can she love Ser Jorah? She thought last time when she realized that he was in love with her that no, she could not. She tried to imagine him being with him and just couldn't imagine it. So
yeah,
unless her opinions have changed.
Does she want to? I mean, is what's in it for her really if she's trying to force herself to love him?
Right.
Feels like
yes. And like you said, she might need that marriage to be one for an alliance.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the first time a marriage was made for an alliance.
No, indeed. Well, there are 3 ways that you could help us. You could leave us a review. You could buy some merchandise at ghostsofharrenhal.threadless.com. And you could buy us an Arbor Gold at buymeacoffee.com/ghostsharrenhal. Even become a sustainer at the Lord Paramount or Knight of the Realm level. To those who already have done that, we are supremely grateful.
That we are. And as always, you can reach us at ghost.harrenhal@gmail.com. You can go out and follow us on Twitter at @ghostharrenhal. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.